right, Ted, I worry that small business owners tend to plow all of their resources into their businesses, assuming that they'll retire on the sale of their business. Now, what are some of the real-life problems with this approach to retirement planning?
Well, first off, is there going to be a retirement? That's the real problem. If you haven't started thinking about it, planning it, and just say, I'm going to retire and I'm going to live in my retirement with the proceeds of the sale of the business, you're also plowing your human resource into the business, and it's very difficult to unwind that mindset. So most small business owners have a great deal of difficulty retiring, particularly those that are running a family business where the next generation comes into the business. But the real problem is if they're plowing their resources, human and capital, into the business, how are they going to change that mindset so they can get value out of the business? So the harvesting concept is completely missing there. So the big problem is they're in that mode of thinking. They haven't started to plan for their retirement. So both financially and from a human standpoint, they're not going to be ready when the time comes.
So you're saying planning for retirement is something that small business owners struggle with even more than probably the general population.
Small business owners, professionals in particular, certainly we're attorneys, but we know attorneys have a great deal of difficulty retiring, particularly when they're in a small practice. Sometimes larger practices force people out at some age, but there is very, very little motivation to get out if you're making money. The clients still call you, and sooner or later, we all know that time comes when you either grow old or you don't. So retirement will be an essential part of the plan.
Your first message is these people have to start to plan. Now, the next issue clearly is that there are other ways to plan other than the sale of the business. But for the business owner, the sale of the business is an important part of their retirement plan, how they're going to generate income from that business. And what are some of the pitfalls there, or what sort of suggestions do you have?
Well, there's a number of different distinctions in the type of closely held business. Do you have partners, or is this some type of solo practice, no matter how the business is organized? Choosing the right entity is also going to affect retirement plan, is going to affect the sale of the business. One of the things I talk to when I have business owners forming a business, they might have partners, is you should be thinking about business divorce. You should be thinking about an exit strategy when you're forming the business. So this needs to be in the document. And I think that creates a mindset that someday this may be all over, and I need to focus on that as one of the goals also. So again, planning, do you have a succession plan? Do you have a way of drawing your value out of this business? Is there a successor that's going to take over? And will that be a sale or something we've referred to as a non-sale, where you continue to hold an equity interest and the successor comes in and continues a successful business, so you continue to draw income from it and during the years of retirement? But again, you have to start that early, and we know there's a lot of volatility in the marketplace. We've seen a financial crisis 3 years ago where it might have been very difficult or impossible for somebody, even with a very successful venture, to find a lender that was interested in providing the funds. So then we're trapped in that circumstance. If we want to get out, and seller financing and the value of the business is going to be beaten down by the economic circumstances. So certainly grooming the successor or having the succession plan in place. If it's a family business, have you brought the right children into the business or other family members? Have you chosen the right successor? Have you groomed them appropriately? And then the financial details need to be worked on also, because it just could come at the wrong time.
I think you say people should plan early, but do they? Is it pretty common for business owners to think about this at the beginning, or is it much more common that people are scrambling at the end?
For the most part, it's uncommon. And when it works well is when they have the right advisors that specialize in business succession and can take this concern away from them by working out the details, by putting a roadmap in place, starting to implement the steps in that pursuit. And business succession planning experts are very, very rare, and that can get someone through this process, starting with them early.
Interesting. I think there's the who are you going to sell it to is one issue, and then there's also the value, sort of maintaining the value or increasing the value of the business. Do you have any suggestions about that?
Well, one of the things that I find very effective is to get somebody to do an appraisal. Mm-hmm. People don't like appraisal. The results are uncertain, and it's going to cost it's going to cost $10,000 to $20,000 to get an appraisal done. But if we're talking about transferring the business by sale or by gift, it happens to be a family business, you really can't start that process without an appraisal. And certainly in an unrelated sale, or even in a related sale, in the due diligence checklist, both parties are going to get an appraisal and look at all the other details associated with that business. If I'm a buyer, I'm going to say, what is their motivation to sell? Why are they selling now? Clearly, if retirement is one of those things, why hadn't we worked this out just a little bit earlier? So maybe I've put this person under pressure to sell the business. So that value issue, certainly a purchase and sale agreement, a buy-sell agreement, if it's in place early enough, can have a lot of different triggers. Mm-hmm. And it's a natural where you have more than one business owner, or you have a family business with a new generation. So the buy-sell triggers would be death, disability, retirement, termination of employment, competition with the company, a former spouse at divorce will be bought out in the buy-sell agreement. A buy-sell agreement would provide a valuation method to determine what the price is, and that provides certainty for everybody involved.
But that initial valuation sounds like it also does some reality testing. If we're trying to get people to recognize where they are in their retirement planning, starting off with a real appraisal of their business to see what it's worth is probably a really important piece.
The problem that I see in this process at that point is more than half of these business owners that started a business on their own have underestimated what they have. Mm-hmm. In many instances, they've brought family into it. The business is taking care of a lot of people, but they started with a good idea and a lot of work ethic, and they don't dream what these appraisals will get to. Mm-hmm. So it is a wake-up call at that point. Boy, they suddenly get this thing. I thought if I wanted to sell this, I'd have to get $5 million for it, and a qualified appraiser says it's worth $10 million. Suddenly I have a lot more to protect, but a lot more available for my retirement if I take the steps that I need to take to harvest the value out of that business.
Interesting. Now, as you talk about protection, what are some of those other things that business owners need to do to protect themselves, which is, I think, part of retirement planning as well?
Well, certainly the starting point is the entity structure itself. Mm-hmm. Actually, the starting point. I've fallen into the trap, and you're an attorney, so you've probably seen some asset protection seminars. They never talk about liability insurance. So I guess the starting point is to talk to a risk management person and say, here are your risks. Mm-hmm. Here are the ones you already knew about. Here are some that you didn't think about. And here are the gaps in your protection. So the first step would be to investigate, can I transfer this risk to somebody mm-hmm. and get a better night's sleep? The next step is, what type of entity do we have? Do I have a limited liability company? Or do I have a traditional or an S corporation where the entity itself provides protection to the owners? Mm-hmm. Or is it something that I'm so involved in, like a professional practice, where the entity doesn't really protect me from my own malpractice? Mm-hmm. And how do I handle that? Obviously, we mentioned the liability coverage, but when I get out, how long does my risk take place? And I've worked with a bunch of physicians that are long in retirement doing their estate plans, and there's still the possibility that somewhere back in their days of practice, there's something lurking that can jump up and get them. Mm-hmm. So again, you've got to have a tail on your liability policy and do the best you can do to avoid this through ownership of assets. Obviously, the qualified plan we know is the most protected asset. In some states, we have the homestead is a completely protected asset. If we're in a state that doesn't do that, have we divided our ownership of assets up appropriately? So maybe the person most at risk doesn't have an individually titled asset or something that can be reached by a creditor.
So how about other types of insurance? I would think some business owners probably lack even basic coverage for their business, liability, not liability, but just, cases
Well, certainly they need a basic business owner's policy, which runs the gamut from fire damage all the way out to liability. Mm-hmm. From a personal standpoint, do they have the right umbrella coverage that can protect them from other liabilities? Have they thought about this enough? And have they really dealt with someone who works in risk management to determine where the gaps might be in their protection? Again, as somebody gets older, there may be a point where you do need one of these asset protection specialists, and maybe you do need a domestic asset protection trust to put your assets in, or one of the foreign asset protection techniques. Again, there's a lot of complexity, there's costs of setting that up, mm-hmm. and there's some risk that maybe somewhere down the road some judge doesn't go along with what the rules are for that asset protection trust. But mm-hmm. I think most people in that category have not really talked to a specialist about risk management and determined where all the gaps are. But clearly the qualified plan is one place we know we're protected most.
Right, and let's move to that now. Let's talk about the qualified plan. Do most business owners, small business owners, establish them? And if they do, what type do they typically establish?
What I see in small businesses, particularly professional practices, is the concern that I have to make ongoing contributions year to year to a qualified plan. Even if I only have a few employees, or maybe I have 80 employees, once I get into the qualified plan, I've got to cover all these people, and mm-hmm. there are costs associated with making continuous required contributions. So in a lot of those instances, I will see a profit-sharing plan, mm-hmm. because a profit-sharing plan, just the rules are, as you know, they need to be regular and recurring. But from year to year, they don't have to be the same amount.
Right.
But there's the trap. I remember very vividly talking to a surgeon recently, and he says, "Oh, our business is so bad. Well, 2 years in a row, we didn't contribute anything to our profit-sharing plan." And I said, "Yeah, I'm talking to you at your second country club. Mm-hmm. maybe we ought to adjust our spending and make sure, adjust our salaries and our draws, if it's a partnership or an LLC, adjust what we're taking out of the business and make sure we've made the contribution to the profit-sharing plan." So in some instances, 401k, you make a decision year to year to reduce your salary, and you do have some flexibility there, but I'd rather see a plan in these instances where there were required contributions. But again, a retirement design specialist is going to have to talk to them, tell them what the requirements are that they're going to have to meet compliance-wise, Department of Labor regulations, funding issues, and what kind of pressure that's going to put on the company to do the funding.
Yeah, and in the qualified plans, that is my area. And in the small plan market, there are ways to limit the cost for the rank and file employees. There are some plan designs, and I think a lot of people aren't aware of that if you have a business owner that wants to get a large percentage of the contribution, you probably can do that, given the right, census. As long as the business owner is a little older than the other employees, that typically will work. So there are some good strategies for that particular goal. But even maybe stepping back a little bit more, I guess you're agreeing that the business owner probably should have a qualified plan, some other source of funding for retirement, and not rely entirely on that business sale.
You're throwing away a tremendous opportunity if you don't. You're throwing away the opportunity to get tax deferral. Very clearly, the tax deferral. I could just doing some research now about potential tax reform. Mm-hmm. If you look at the Joint Tax Committee's report, if you add defined benefit plans and 401k plans together, the tax deferral on the deductible contributions and the deferral on the earnings mm-hmm. is the second largest tax expenditure reported to the Congress by the Joint Tax Committee. It's an enormous advantage, and obviously everybody out there is taking advantage. Why wouldn't you do it?
Right.
The second thing is, we know it's the single most protected asset class mm-hmm. that you can have because it's protected by federal law. And obviously IRAs and And retirement plans are also protected under state creditor law. So I think you're wasting two really valuable opportunities if you're a small business owner or a professional practicing in a small practice.
Yeah, and it is sort of disturbing that only about 30% of small businesses actually have plans. I mean, they're really missing an important opportunity.
Again, it sounds to me like you need another specialist, but there are very cost-effective ways, and there are people that specialize in that pension administration business for the small business owners. As you know, there's cost-effective ways to get the design done and the administration done.
Right. I think the costs of administration have really come down a lot over time as well. All right. How about non-qualified deferred compensation? Does that ever have a role in a small business?
There's a lot of different ways that you can get your value out of the business during retirement. And you already mentioned sale. In the sale category, of course, you're going to have installment sale or some specialized form of installment sale, like a self-canceling note or a private annuity. And we have buy-sell agreements that can bind somebody into one of these transactions where you can harvest money out of the business. And again, all of those are risky because they rely on the continued success of the business, because somebody is going to have to pay those out. There are other ways in the transaction. Sometimes we have ESOPs, sometimes we have family businesses. We might have an ESOP. We might have some other components to this. If we have deferred compensation in a corporation, that may be some way to make a continuing payment to a business owner that could be substantial. There are other things that personally, I've done these in some plans. You got the retiring owner, they've been bought out. Maybe part of the buyout is they work as a consultant. They maybe don't work very hard, but they're paid over a period of time. Non-compete. Even though somebody appears to be retiring, it's perfectly legitimate if they are truly leaving the business to pay them payments not to compete with the business they just sold. So there's a lot of different creative structures to get value to that business owner.
I think that's kind of an interesting difference between business owners and individuals in qualified, that work for employers and are in qualified plans, is you sometimes have built-in sources of regular income over a period of time. Like you said, an installment sale. It's probably not going to be for life, but it's going to be 10 years or 15 years or longer, I would assume.
Personally, when I bought a business, a small business, about half the sale was a consulting agreement I had where, basically I talked to the previous owner on the phone a couple of times, exchanged a few letters, and wrote him a check every single year for his consulting. And again, we have reasonable compensation rules, and there are issues of tax fraud and everything you need to address. But this is very, very common. Paying somebody either a non-compete or paying them as a consultant for a period of time is very, very common. Even in some public buyouts or some larger circumstances.
Okay, and so let's just summarize what we've been talking about. What would you say are the three most important messages to the business owner about retirement planning?
Well, first, I think you need the right advisory team. And as we've discussed this, we've talked business succession, estate planning. Usually there's going to be somebody that can handle both of those. As you know, retirement plan administration is a niche. People do that or they don't do that. So you need to bring somebody in on that. So putting the advisory team together to set up a plan and continuously revise and implement new plans to be flexible over a period of time. But with the retirement plan, I think the next most important thing is pay yourself first. You've got this great opportunity for a deferral. Again, in the second, if we listen to the discussion of tax reform and loopholes, it's the second largest tax expenditure. People take advantage of this. Why shouldn't you take advantage of this if you own your own business? Pay yourself first.
Right. There aren't a lot of tax loopholes left, really. This is one, and you can put a significant amount away for yourself, on a tax deferred basis.
And finally, start earlier rather than later.
In the planning,
yes.
especially even with the sale of the business. You said right from the beginning of the establishment of the business, you ought to have an exit strategy.
You want to think about your way out.
Very interesting. Thanks a lot, Ted.
Thanks, David.
This video was made possible by the New York Life Center for Retirement Income.